Welcome to Wildlife Outdoors with your host, Russell and Jose. If you have a passion for conservation of the outdoors, or you're enjoying a calming hike in the mountains, an exhilarating kayak trip on the river, feeling a fish on the end of your line, cooking on an open flame in a primitive campsite, or stalking big game, just waiting for the perfect shot, you're in the right place. So put on your boots and polarized sunglasses and come along for the ride.
Welcome back to another episode of Wildlife Outdoors. Today we got another exciting episode for you. We have somebody that is a passionate photographer who loves traveling all around the U.S. and he's here to share some stories with us. So welcome, Jeremy. How you doing, man?
Good. Thanks for having me, you guys.
Of course, man. I see what is that, Rocky Mountains behind you?
Yeah, it's Rocky Mountain National Park. It's a place called Loch Bell. The mountain is actually called Shark Tooth, and it's a pretty sweet hike. It's probably one of my favorite in the entire world, honestly.
Dude, that's awesome. Did you take that picture?
Yeah, it's 60 by 90 inch.
Dude, that's insane.
Dude, it's beautiful.
Thank you. I took that photo back in 2019.
Nice.
That is awesome. Is it layered or anything, or is that just a single shot?
Single shot, which is what I prefer to take, especially on like adventures and all that. It's just easier than trying to do an HDR.
Dude, That is awesome. Sorry, I mean, I was just captivated by it, so I didn't even really finish the intro, but I was looking at it and I was like, oh my God, that is really nice. And I mean, the quality is insane. So what do you shoot with?
So this is my second camera I had, which was a D5600. My new stuff I have a Nikon Z6 and a Nikon Z6 II. So
nice.
So I've been Nikon my whole career. I love them, and they've got their quirks. All cameras do, right? But I think once you start shooting on something, you kind of get used to the quality of what you're using. And it's funny, my buddy that got me into photography, actually, he's a Canon guy, so we've had that rivalry my whole career. But they both take great photos, as do Sony, Fuji. There's great cameras out there.
So you said your buddy who got you into photography is a Canon dude. So I imagine you maybe have fiddled around with his camera a bit. So what made you decide to go the opposite direction with Nikon?
No, it's funny. He called me before I was going to a trip, my buddy Mike, and we grew up together, so we're like brothers. And he was like, "I'm not telling what to do, but you need to buy a camera, man." And I was like, all right. So I was like, looking, and I knew he was a Canon guy, but it was funny. It's like when I was hiking when I was younger, all I could ever remember was that yellow band. And so like subliminally, it's what kind of drove me toward Nikon. I was like, I don't know what it is. I just need to do it. And so I've messed around on his camera like once or twice. And it's funny because Canon and Nikon are actually like exact opposites. So I used it for like 2 seconds. It's like, this sucks. I literally can't shoot on this thing. So I've just been so used to, Nikons. And then the Nikon Z series was, they were actually Sony sensors. So, they've been great. I can't complain at all. I love the Z series are absolutely amazing. There's been a couple issues I've had with them, which I don't need to go into the technical side of it, but you figure out how to clean it up in post-processing and all that kind of stuff.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm thinking about getting the Nikon Z6 III. Mainly because right now I run a Nikon D750 and it doesn't have a auto tracking or any type of continual autofocus on video, and I'm wanting to get a lot more into video stuff. So I was looking at my options and I was thinking about going the Sony route just because their video was phenomenal. But I have so many lenses that I don't really want to part with, and I don't want to have to sell everything and then just have 2 lenses until I can save up to get more. So I was like, maybe I'll just go the Z route and get an adapter and try to do that. And I think that's what I'm going to do. And when the Z6 III came out, when I first saw the ad for it, I started looking at all the details and I said, that's right up my alley. Like, it has a really, really good processing system for video, and it does have continual autofocus, and I can still keep my lenses with an adapter and all that. So I was like, I think that's what I'm going to do. And the price point is, quite a bit less than what I was going to go with the Sony route. So I think that's what I'm going to do. But I haven't used any other. I think Jose has a Z5, 6.
I got a Z5.
Z5. So I've
Nice.
used his briefly while we're at the Buffalo National River, but never used one a lot. But I'm excited to hopefully jump to the Z series.
Yeah, there's a reason I haven't looked up the Z6 III because I don't want to buy a new camera, so I'm like trying to prolong that. I know what happens every time I look at it. I'm like, oh my god, it's just got this one thing.
Yeah.
And my buddy got the Z8, and those are insane. Like he had it. He was showing me because like we're both storm chasers, so he like sent me this picture, and I was like, dude, that's so sweet. He was like, yeah. He's like, if you hold it down, it actually will go back a second in time if you miss the shot, and then it'll take it.
No
And so
way.
it's like basically like pre-recording. It's so insane because like for storm chasing, the lightning triggers are a big thing, right?
Yeah.
So if you're taking that out of the equation, then it kind of changes the whole situation too. So it's pretty crazy, and he takes some great shots with it. But I'm like, all right, I have two Z6s. I just need to like chill out and like kind of alternate the two of them and stuff. So I think that's the thing with photography, right? You start like, oh, okay, cool. Like you start like escalating the way you're going through it. It's like, this is going to make me so much better. But it's really like, as long as you have the fundamentals down, like the nicer camera is definitely like, it is amazing to go up. But also like, if you know what you're doing with your current camera, I mean, you really can't go wrong.
Exactly.
So that's something I would like to kind of dive into a little bit later on. But first, before we get too ahead of ourselves, I do want to know, and I'm kind of curious, how did you, I guess, get your start in photography? Like, what was the catalyst to like this is something that I'm like potentially might be interested in, and kind of just want to, dip my toes in the water, so to speak.
So it's kind of crazy because like my thing was like when I moved to Colorado at 18, I was dealing with like crazy mental health issues. Like I was actually like going to commit suicide, and my dad walked in the basement, and like so I had this. I was on antidepressants, all like kind of full gamut, and but at the same time, my dad like started taking me hiking with my uncle, and so we were getting out a lot. And the thing that's wild is like I'm old enough where when I started, I had like a handheld camera, right? Like we didn't have like we still had the Nokias with the snake on them, and you had to press buttons to even make the thing move and all that. So I didn't grow up with a cell phone camera. So honestly, it's actually probably the best part of what got me into nature photography because back in the day, it was just like conceptualizing and really like learning how to connect with nature and allow it to like kind of calm your mind and stay connected to the world around you, right? And I moved back to California. I was playing college football, moved home to Southern California to play down there. And the night I moved down there, I rolled over in my sleep and I cracked my back, and I broke it. And so I kept trying to play through that, and it just wasn't going to work. Found out like later on that it broke, and moved back to Colorado. And when I moved back here, I had gotten surgery, and I started painting and drawing kind of because I couldn't work out the way I did and all that other stuff. And so a week after I had my back surgery, I actually almost died from my back surgery because they got anesthesia in my lungs. So I now have these jacked up lung issues because of that. But
Wow.
I painted my first canvas like a week after my surgery because like really didn't have anything better to do. And so I started painting and drawing, and then that kind of taught me like really like compositionally what like I was doing with like colors and all that. And so that was kind of part of the thing was when I moved to San Diego, like a couple of years later, I really started getting into hiking a lot more and kind of like pushing my envelope. I did it in college, but it wasn't quite as serious. And that was why my childhood buddy, when I moved back to Colorado, he was like, dude, I'm not telling you what to do, but you need to buy a camera because I know what you could do with it. And so like his push was pretty crazy. So that's when I got a camera, it was like instantly like it all clicked. It was wild. It was like, 10 years of just everything kind of symbiotically coming together. And I mean, I didn't put a camera down the second I bought it. I shot like 15,000 photos my first year I did it.
Oh wow.
And I'm about 8 years in now, and I'm over 100,000 photos. So, I mean, it's like you have to be a lunatic though to get good like that quick, and like I mean, that's a great thing with digital. I mean, if this was film days, you couldn't do that, like,
Yeah.
I mean, I would have been broke as hell, like trying to do any of that, so, digital really has changed everything. I mean, for the good and bad, like for better and worse, right? I mean, AI now has really changed the way all of this is going and going forward and all that. But I think if you're good enough at anything you do, people are going to know, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. So is
Sorry,
majority
that
of
was a
what
really long-winded way to answer that.
No, dude, that was great.
it was. So you're a nature photographer, obviously. So do you focus more on landscape? Do you focus more on wildlife? What is kind of the nature side of it that you prefer to shoot?
For sure, landscape. It's like when you get into like wildlife, it is such a different animal. I remember when I went down to Florida to sell, so wild. You go on like this trail, and they're so close. And wildlife in Florida is totally different. I mean, you literally walk out of the car and there's like an alligator there, or a crane, or a heron, or whatever, and it's absolutely insane. So I learned to appreciate wildlife down there. But some of my buddies in Colorado like are absolutely insane at it. So I appreciate what they do. But like you go to some of these places, like they have a $12,000 lens. Like you can't compete with that at all, right? Yeah. Like they can get way better stuff up close, and you have to be really patient and like that. Like people think I'm super patient, but honestly, I was just walking across a frozen lake when I took this. Like I'm not sitting there waiting for sunlight and all this other stuff. Like a lot of the stuff I do is just like spur of the moment. And you really just have to know your settings too, right? Like when you're walking like and doing this stuff, especially in the snow is insane. But that's what I love. Like I love the like interconnectivity of the elements, plus like, I mean, I'm not an adrenaline junkie, but I kind of like the danger too of it all, and just kind of like the unknown factors. But then like when you go, like for me, the reason like I love the snow so much is it's like the ultimate separator. Like almost all nature photographers go into hibernation for winter, and it's like when I'm just waking up, So for me, it's awesome. Like you can go do a 12-mile snowshoe and see maybe like 5 people the entire day, right? But then like to me too, like when you're in like 70-mile-per-hour winds and you have snow blasting you in your face, and you take off your gloves to shoot and they're so cold, like you have to put your gloves back on within 2 minutes. Like there's just such a different element to it. And it really goes back to psychology for me, where it's like anything in life, when things get really hard and difficult, like how do you keep your brain like focused on like the task at hand and like what's in front of you? Because I mean, when you got like 70-mile-per-hour winds blowing in your face, like how do you focus on like capturing that moment in time? And I think it's a really hard thing for me, where people don't understand like the dangers, or like what it takes to actually go get these shots, or like when you're storm chasing and you have a bolt of lightning like literally like less than a mile from you, and you're like, okay, that's really close, but I have to hang in here long enough to get this next shot, right? Like it's inherently like this crazy experience. So I love the chaos of it, and really learning how to keep your mind focused is like the hardest thing I think in the world for it.
Yeah,
dude. So it sounds like you had some pretty intense experiences trying to capture some of these photos. Is there any like off the rip that you can just come to mind? Like, man, that was crazy.
Yeah. I had this one a couple of years ago where I was, I've only been storm chasing for 5 years. So I started in 2019, and I got this perfect reflection off this lake. And it was because I was like drinking beer at a brewery with my buddy and saw the storm coming in, and went home and got my camera and got this shot. And so after that, it kind of was like, okay, well, I'm going to start focusing on this, especially with COVID and stuff. Like I could go out east and there's milling around and stuff. And so a couple of years ago, I was actually chasing this one cell coming in, and the Virga are kind of like the tentacles of the cell that come down, and a lot of lightning will travel through it. So I was like focused on this one cell, and I was so stoked. I got this awesome shot, and then like 30 seconds later, this bolt like ripped so close to me. I was like, oh my God, all right, I really need to go. So like packed up in the car, get rolling, and then I was like down the road, and I was like, all right, like this is like way too good to just pass up. So I like sat there, rolled down my window, put my like camera outside the window, pressed the button, and then like rolled my window back up because I was gonna keep it safe. And I got this like crazy shot of like the lightning going through the sky. It's probably one of the coolest like close up ones I've ever had. But then like I just grabbed my camera and like went back, and it's so wild because it's all relative, right? Now there's stuff like I've had a couple that ripped so close to me while I'm in the back of my truck, and I'm like, all right, it's really time to go now. So you just like you kind of get more comfortable around it, and it's crazy because you become so much more in tune. Like every single year, as lightning's getting closer, as it's traveling, everything you start like noticing it better, and your patterns and like the way you recognize like cells and the way they move and the way lightning's going to strike is so different. It's crazy. It's almost like a sixth sense type thing. And this year was really tough. Like this was the worst year of storms I've had since I started. So like I only had like 2 or 3 real good shots in the early summer, which was fine. I ended up spending most of my summer biking, so it worked out perfect. But it's pretty wild to see the way you even progress over the years, you know. And I mean that's what people know me for now is like it's lightning and snow. It's like 2 dichotomies of seasons, you know.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting that you say like you can see that progression because I guess that's one of the cool things about photography. Like you literally have a record that you can reference later and kind of track your progression. Like was there, I guess, what was the point where you realized like, you know, I'm actually not that bad at this. Like I'm getting pretty good.
I think like pretty early on, I mean, you realize when you have a proclivity toward it, right? Like,
yeah.
I think the biggest thing was I remember when I switched from like the autofocus modes of like my first couple cameras to manual. And I remember I was actually shooting a shot at the Air Force Academy Chapel. And I had a couple friends that commented on the same exact post that were like, dude, what did you do, man? This is so much better than like normal. And I think that was like 2018 or something like that, or 2017, one of the two. And it was kind of wild because I noticed it, but then like it was funny because I thought like you needed to shoot in manual, and there's so much stuff I did when I was younger that I'm like, oh my god, you suck. Like, why would you ever do it that way, right? So I think you kind of have that like it's like this precipice of a moment that like kind of pushes you toward the next position, but then you also keep like you kind of keep evolving, and then you get to a point now like I don't want to say photography is boring for me, but honestly, a lot of stuff is kind of boring because it literally becomes second nature, right? Like the part of your brain focusing on it is so much smaller now than when you're first starting and trying to learn. And so I think you start like kind of trying to push your boundaries in other ways and like, you know, look at the same situations in a different way. And so like, I think it's just that constant evolution and growth. And like that's the way I focus most of my life on. So you're still growing as you're growing in other ways too, you know, like this year's been a huge biking year for me, but I see that every time I get back behind the camera, I start shooting differently because I'm looking at the same situation in a different way, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So sorry, Russell, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just want to ask a question before I lose it, which I think I may have. Hold on, give me 1 second. Oh yeah, okay. So sorry. I think I might have ADHD, dude. Not sure. But so I guess speaking to that, what now is like a good motivator for you? Like what keeps you going or wanting to get back out there when, you know, like you said, there's times where it's starting to get a little boring.
It's more like, you know, stuff for me now, it's kind of like personal goals interlaced with you know, I have a decent following of people that are very tied into the mental health aspects of it because a lot of my posts I try to interlace stories of either things I'm going through or things I've gone through and you know, and some of that's like it can be ambiguous too, right? A lot of people like I mean, I pride myself on like always being like, okay, like you could follow my Instagram and you know everything about me and nothing about me all at the same time. You know, and so I try to always kind of go with that, and especially with like, I mean, you even look at seasonal depression, and a lot of people hate winter because they go through such a hard time, and I try to be empathetic toward that, but also like I want to show winter in a way that shows people like there is a beauty in it. Like even in the coldest, darkest months of the entire year, you can still find beauty in that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I love, which I know a lot of photographers think, it's funny to see how many people hate going back to the same place twice, right? Because they feel like they've already shown it, or they haven't or they've captured it in the way they can, whatever. I love going back to the same place like 10 times to be like, okay, you've already seen it this way. How do you show it in a different light, or in a way that people haven't seen before, or how you haven't seen before too, you know? So I think in a lot of ways, it's just like always pushing your boundaries toward like, okay, like how can you go to this same place and see something different? Or like, honestly, like last month I went and did Mount Washington, which is like one of the most dangerous hikes in the U.S. and the world or whatever, because of the wind. You know, the wind there is absolutely insane, and it's pretty crazy. Like when I started at ground level, it was like fall, and then once you got past a certain point, it was like being in a snowstorm in Colorado. So it's like so crazy, but you know, you kind of try to push your boundaries on what you're familiar with and what you're comfortable with. And then I went up to Acadia National Park for a few days and like went crazy up there. Like, I don't know, between the two, I think I took like 800 or 900 shots. Then I flew home, and then I went to do Zion with my buddy. So it's like, and I do Zion a couple times a year, but like we went to the subway and he was landing near and stuff. So I think it's just like, it's just interlacing like stuff you want to do and see, and then like also like what you feel will connect with people too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff I shoot now where I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I've done this before, but I know people like it, and like they can connect with my story or what I've gone through or whatever, you know? So I think it's just like constantly evolving too, you know? It's like I'm always reading in the background. I'm always doing new things to kind of push myself like psychologically and in new directions. I mean, in September, I did a 250-mile bike ride. I'm actually going and trying to do a 300-mile bike ride in December. And it's like, I know that's going to help me grow too, you know? So.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you even prepare for, sorry, Russell.
No, go ahead.
So how do you even prepare for a 250, let alone a 300-mile bike ride?
Dude, you got it. I mean, it's, you know, so I think the biggest thing, like training wise, is just like, it's like the Pareto distribution, right? It's like the 80-20 rule. Like 80% of your rides are not that long. Like I'd say probably 80% of my rides are like this 13-mile loop I do pretty much every morning until it gets cold. Like right now, it's just like way too cold to be biking in the morning. So I'll do the stationary, but it's pretty much like work out and do like a 13-mile ride every morning. And then like you'll interlace some like longer rides, like 50 miles or whatever. But it's like just making sure your body's like in check. I mean, it's really hard because like there's so many people that are like, oh my God, this is so dangerous. It's so stupid, blah, blah. And like, I've said it myself, but also it's like, well, I'm not going to stop myself. So, you know, it's like like my IT bands go ballistic after 100 miles. I started when I did my 200-mile ride, I started like dealing with Achilles issues. So it's like understanding the way those are working. And then I'm also kind of a lunatic. I actually don't use clip-in shoes. I actually use like tennis shoes. So it's also understanding like the way your muscles and ligaments start reacting differently as you're like pedaling further and further. So like when something starts hurting, you have to shift your foot position and understand like it's literally like being in touch with your mind, body, and soul on the longer stuff. And there's a point where it's like you just have to push through like the pain of it. It hurts, like it sucks. Like I had freaking blisters in like both of my cheeks by the time the last ride was over, which was, let me tell you how fun that is, like going through, you know, after 200 miles. And then like I was going off 2 hours of sleep on the last one, and I was like hallucinating, and I started getting paranoia. And I was going through this area of Boulder where it's like it's a bunch of homeless people like in these woods. So I'm biking through this thing at, you know, like 2 a.m, just your mind just starts playing tricks on you. So you have to like kind of learn how to calm your mind. And I remember like being at like mile like 225, you kind of get to this point where you're like, oh my God, like for me, it was cool because you know, the furthest I had biked, me and my buddy did a 200-mile ride. So I made it to like 203 miles. But once you get past your like previous furthest, you're like, oh man, I'm in this moment. Like I'm never going to have this moment again. Like I'm pushing my limits and pushing toward like that next moment. And I remember being like, Janus, this is so stupid. Why would you ever do this? This is so dumb. And I got home and I laid on the couch and just like, oh my God, I did like 252.47 miles. And the next morning I woke up and I was like, you could have gone to 300, dude. Like you're going to do it. So like, it's just, you start pushing what you think is possible. And it ties back to the nature photography stuff too, because you know, back in the day, I used to think a 10-mile hike was long. Now I'm like, all right, if it's like 10 miles is like my minimum almost now. And it's like, okay, like, can you push yourself to 20? Like the longest day hike I've ever done is like 22 miles, but I'm like, I think I could do like 26. So like, how do you push that next boundary, man?
That's insane.
That's sick, dude.
I think the longest hike I've ever done, and it wasn't a one-day hike. We ended up camping. I think we did about 10 miles. And so I heard you talking earlier before we got on the podcast about you haven't been to Oklahoma.
No,
right?
Not yet.
Okay, so if you have time when you go to Oklahoma, on the Arkansas side of the border, not too far from the Oklahoma border, there's a place called the Cossatot River, and it has a 12.6 mile hike. It's an easy hike. I mean, I thought it was going to be rough because the first time that I started looking at it, it said it was one of the hardest hikes in the Ouachita Mountains and all sorts of stuff. And it's really not that bad, but it is absolutely gorgeous. And Cossatot stands for, I think, skull crusher in one of the native languages. And so there's like these cascading waterfalls and boulders. And I mean, it's just an absolutely gorgeous place. Fall is the best time to go. But I think we did 10 miles of the 12.6 or 12.8 miles there, and camped it. But I couldn't imagine doing like that times 2 in one day like that. That's a lofty goal. I mean, for me at least, I don't hike as much as you do, but that's insane.
Yeah, it's wild because you have to like, it's honestly mentally is where it gets you. So it's like if you can mentally prepare enough for it to be like, this is absolutely going to be miserable, and you know that, then you're fine. It's when people, I think it's when people have this like, it's like the Disney fantasy of hiking, right? Like, oh, I'm going to go out there and it's going to be so great, and there's going to be waterfalls and butterflies, and it's just fantastic all around you, right? And it's like, and then like, you know, Prince Charming or, you know, your princess is going to be in the woods somewhere. Like, it's like, it doesn't work that way. Like it's like hard grinding work. And honestly, that's where I take my best photos, is when I am so damn tired and you're like, wait, like you have to focus to like see something beautiful in front of you. It's this weird like juxtaposition of thinking, you know?
Yeah. So when you're going on these trips where you know you're going to be hiking for, you know, 10 plus miles, what is your, like, how do you decide what gear you want to take in terms of photography gear?
So usually like, it depends. Like, so a lot of the stuff that I do, if I'm doing like snow stuff or whatever, it'll depend if I know like, okay, if it's really dark outside, it's like, okay, I'm probably going to need my tripod today, something like that. If I can nix the tripod, I totally will, because like obviously that adds a lot of gear. But I always have like my first aid kit, like backup flares, all the other stuff. So like my day bag on most hikes is like 30 pounds. Oh, so wow. It's like, yeah. So most people, it's like I remember my buddy. So 2 of my buddies, we went and did Mount Whitney together, and one of them was an ex-Army Ranger, and we you know, we're comparing packs. And they both saw mine and they started laughing, and they're like, dude, it's way too much. And they picked it up, started laughing again. I'm like, all right, guys, like, I'm just telling you, like, it's going to get cold up there, whatever. So we end up like getting up there, and my buddy was like, dude, just go up there. I know you want to be up there at sunrise. So I get up there at sunrise, and they're coming up, and we saw them, and there was like a lightning hut up there. So I went, shot sunrise, come back down, and I go into the lightning hut, and those two are standing in the corner holding each other because they didn't have flares. So I ended up like, I had enough, so I threw them those, but like both of them were like later on, my buddy was like, "Yeah, dude, pretty sure we had hypothermia," because I was like hallucinating up there too, and but it's one of those things. Like I pride myself on if I ever get stuck on a mountain, I can make it through the night in a couple of days, probably with everything I have, right?
Yeah.
So like photography gear, I'm actually pretty simple. I have basically like my camera. I have a 24-70 is my everyday lens that I use, and then I use a 14-30 wide angle for other things. And then I have two filters. So I basically I have an ND filter on for both of them, but I have a UV filter that is my everyday lens filter on them. So I mean, mine is actually pretty simple. If I'm like really like want to take more weight, I'll take like the 50 to 250, but I don't shoot on it much. And honestly, in the mountains, it's not. I mean, I've taken some pretty cool shots of marmots on both of those other lenses, so it doesn't bother me not having like a wildlife lens.
Nice. And so, do you take like a variable ND filter or?
Yeah, I do a variable, which is funny because like variables are, I actually love them because I know how to use it, but it's like it's literally only, like, I think you can only use like half of it because once you get past a certain point, it starts making an X that goes over it.
Yeah.
So like that's the other thing too with like ND filters is that I've learned is like you have to learn how they actually take photos and then edit. Because I have a super like vibrant and saturated style. So when you start pushing the limits on that, especially if you start pulling like dehaze on it, it'll start vignetting all the corners. So you have to know either using like a lens profile correction or pulling back on how much you're dehazing or saturating. Otherwise, you'll start getting these really crazy like artifacts around it too.
I see. Yeah, I've yet to deal with that. I don't use an ND filter too much. The only time I ever really use one is if I'm doing a long exposure for waterfalls or anything like that, or if it's just too bright. So like I started trying to do like portraits, like sports portraits and stuff like that, and I'll use a speed light. And the speed light's just a little too much, and I can't have my shutter speed up too high because I'm using a speed light. So I'll throw an ND on there, but I don't ever try to max it out because I use a variable as well. But that's good to know that I can't use it like that.
Yeah, mine's basically like I'll go between the min and like the first line basically. That's like my range, but like my rule of thumb with shooting is if I'm pointing at the sun, I'll pretty much always use one. Well, unless you're trying to do like use like a starburst or something like that. Or if I'm trying to do basically, if I have it on a tripod, I'll use it because it's usually enough highlights that pull through where it can blow it out.
I see. So I noticed on your Instagram that you had a few pictures where it may be the starburst that you're talking about, but it looks like there's a central focus and then there's just like, lines coming off from it of light. How do you get that?
Yep. So usually you'll want to shoot between so the most intense one you'll get is like f/22, but you usually want to be about f/16. So, and then you want to focus like on the actual sun. There's a saying though, like, sweet 16, which is kind of like the sweet spot for your lens. Once you start pushing toward like f/22, it's kind of stretching like your lens, and each layer of glass also can be variable on how strong it is. So like I typically shoot on like f/16 because it'll also drop your it'll raise your aperture enough to where you have enough sun and you're not worried about like handshake if it gets too low. So, I mean, it's like, and that's the stuff, like, that's what I'm talking about too, like with the cerebral side of it too. It's like, you're thinking about all that stuff in like a second if you can catch it and capture it and all that too.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's crazy how much, like, once you learn something, how little you have to use your brain, like you're talking about earlier, and it takes up a small part of your brain, but it's crazy the amount of things, like every situation is far different. And so, like, I do a lot of, sports photography now. Like, I play on a flag football team, and when I was playing semi-pro, I was also taking pictures. And so it's just second nature now and I use a kit lens. I wish I had a better lens, but I use a kit lens. I use a crop sensor lens on my full frame camera, but I'm just out there and I'm just fluid with it. It doesn't take much for me to know what I'm doing and how I need to, approach this situation depending on what the play is and where the light's at, and if it's a night game or a day game, and, where the play's headed. And I can me also playing football, I know, okay, well, that's run play. I need to do this. It's a pass play. Oh, I'm actually going to do this. And it just, I calculate it like that. And I've had people comment like, oh, wow, like you're so fluid with it. It's like, I'm not even really thinking at that point. But then like, I don't do a lot of nature photography. So hearing you talk about this, I'm like, I have never even thought about that. So it's crazy how expansive photography in its own is.
Yeah. But it's cool, you know, like, and I think that's where, like, I feel like when people start shooting, you kind of gravitate toward what your heart wants to shoot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like when you go too far out of that, like I've seen it in myself too, because people will ask me to do portraits and all that kind of stuff. And like I'll do stuff for like family, friends, but by and large, like, I don't enjoy them, right? Unless you know, like if you know the people, it totally changes it. But, you know, if you have this like proclivity towards something, it's like go toward what you're good at too, because it's what pushes you through the hard times too, right? Like
exactly.
It's nothing more miserable than being miserable doing what you got.
Right.
Dude, amen to that.
Now I'd like to kick it to today's sponsor, Foretold Coffee Company. Elevate your outdoor adventures with Foretold Coffee's premium single origin coffees, meticulously roasted to satisfy both specialty coffee professionals and nature enthusiasts alike. Founded by former airborne cavalry scout Joshua Sandoval, his mission is to bring the mountains home with every cup. Experience their 3 flavors, Peruvian cocoa, El Salvadoran bourbon, and Mexican honey, which is my favorite. So check them out at foretoldcoffeeco.com.
So I don't know about you, but like, well, so I enjoy photography. I wouldn't call myself a photographer by any means, more of like a photography enthusiast. And Russell's actually the guy who kind of got me into that. Russell's great. I think he's a great photographer. But
I don't know about that.
whenever I got a camera in my hand for the first time, like I was taking pictures of everything. It didn't matter. It just like random stuff. Didn't make sense, whatever. But to me, it was fun. And also I think it's something like whenever there's something new, you kind of, I don't know about most people, but for me, like kind of obsess over it. Like, oh man, this is awesome. I want to like learn everything there is about it. So for you, I don't know if it was for like the same for you, like you were just taking photos and all that stuff, but how did you end up finding your way, I guess, into realizing like your thing, the thing that brings you joy, the thing that drives you is landscape photography?
I think it's just like, it's never been work for me. Like I always loved being in nature, but like I grew up in California playing football and like kind of being on the jock end of things when I was younger and working out and doing all that. And then like when I got into nature and could just focus on that, it was just like that connectivity to it. So it's like I feel like it kind of gave me a deeper, like a more impactful meaning. And then, you know, once I actually picked up a camera and started shooting, it's like you just start looking at the world so differently. Like I truly believe I see lights and shadows differently than other people. Like I don't and also like I have this weird thing where like I can actually see a finished product in my head before it's done. Like I know, like when I get a shot, I'm like, oh my God, cool. I know exactly how I'm going to edit this, blah, blah. And so I think I like got that early on, but I think as I progressed, like, you know, I think once you edit so many photos and you understand the way it all works and colors and shadows and saturation, it's like it kind of changes the way you look at the world, but then you also look at the way you're editing too. And like you're, you know, for me, it's like a big part of it is evoking emotion, right? So like a lot of the stuff though, that I think the one thing that a lot of people don't realize is like once you get to a certain point, you're giving up your moment for the enjoyment of others, right? Like, so like lightning, I love lightning more than anything on this planet, but you're so focused on capturing that moment for others to enjoy that like you don't enjoy that moment as much either anymore. So it's a weird thing. It's kind of like it becomes a little bit more selfless in a way. I know, and which is kind of weird to say because in a way, like going and pursuing nature and photography is selfish too. Cause like I do love what I do, don't get me wrong, but also to capture that moment and then bring it back to people is like, it becomes a selfless act because you are trying to give a part of that world back to other people that, you know, I know a lot of people that will never even go close to seeing anything like this their entire life, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's a joy for me to bring that back to the world too.
I've never thought about it like that. That makes so much sense. Beautifully put.
Yeah.
Um,
Thank you, man.
I do have a question. You ever seen the movie Secret Life of Walter Mitty?
Yeah, I was watching it earlier today too.
Dude, one of my
That's
favorite.
awesome.
Yeah, one of my favorite
Yes.
movies, man. But when when you were just saying what you were saying, it that scene where he's sitting on top of the mountain with that photographer, and he it's no leopard. Well, I don't want to like ruin it too much for the listeners, but there's a quote there where he just kind of wants to sit in the moment and without the I guess without the camera interfering with everything. Do you ever experience those kind of moments where, as passionate as you are about photography and sharing it with everybody, is there ever a moment where you just like you don't want that distraction, you just want to be able to kind of sit in it?
Yeah, man. So that actually is one of my favorite moments in any movie ever because I could connect to that so well. Um, but I guess I'm not as crazy as him because like I take the picture and then I enjoy it and then I'm like, oh, all right, this is pretty awesome, man. But you know, it's hard because like lightning, and this is why I love lightning so much, is that moment in time at that same exact time and place will never exist again. Like, you know, and in a lot of ways, um, when you're chasing lightning, you're chasing something that doesn't exist and won't exist again, right? So it's like theoretically in that same time and space. So like it's really hard for me to be like, oh yeah, cool, I drove all this way. Now I'm just gonna watch this one bolt. If like have my camera there, like be like, no, I'm catching this thing, and then I'll enjoy it later, right? So
Yeah.
um, it becomes a weird thing. And honestly, like some of my favorite lightning photos I've seen are like in the moment I wasn't like necessarily like, oh my god about them, but then later on, like I learned to enjoy them or whatever. Or you know, you see these. I had this crazy cloud last year where the rainbow was coming out of both sides, and it had like Berger coming down. It was like so nuts, and I remember enjoying it in the moment. But then later on, I was like, oh my god, like it's crazy. Like I might never get that again in my entire life, right? Of like chasing. So it's kind of alters your view of the world.
Yeah, it
Dude,
definitely
you're
does.
dropping some freaking wisdom, bro. Like, like philosophically, I feel like there's a lot of stuff that you've said that can be applied to like just everyday life, man. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
Well, dude, I mean, like, so someone asked me this. I was meeting with some artists buddies like last month sometime. We were grabbing beers, and uh, my buddy was an artist, and he brought his other buddy, and we're sitting there talking, and he had gone through some dark stuff, like lost a brother and nephew, and all this other stuff, and we were talking about all this, and he's like, let me ask you this. He's like, do you think, like, metaphorically, there's a reason why you chase light in the darkness? And I was like, absolutely. Like, because I feel like my darkness is what allowed me to find my light to bring to people, you know? Um, one of the sayings, like, I developed when I'm biking, like, because you have to have mantras when you're doing this crazy stuff, because, like, otherwise you will go insane. Like, you have to have something that gets you through. But I always say it's like, chase the demons that, or face the demons that chase you in the night, and forever you'll burn your eternal light. And like for me, that's true in like every day, which is why I do all this stuff. Like, believe me, there's so many times I've wanted to quit all this because it gets stressful with the messages and the posting and the feeling like you don't own your life anymore, right? And working your day job and then working the photography just like as your passion project and all that. But then all it takes is like I remember like I've saved people from suicide doing this. Like, and to me, it's like all you have to do is remember that one person's life that you changed, and it creates all the passion, purpose, and meaning you need in your life.
Absolutely.
That's beautiful, dude.
It is.
Holy smokes!
And it's
And there's something else. Sorry, Russell. There's something else you said earlier too, when you were talking about some of the best photos you take is when you're exhausted and you got to focus. And you said something that I found interesting is you're like, I have to find something beautiful. And I was like, dude, it's like, I mean, everyday life stuff, man. Like things can get pretty dark, pardon my language, pretty shitty at times, but man, you just got to find the beauty in the things, dude. You know?
Yeah. Have you ever read Man's Search for Meaning from Viktor Frankl?
I've never even heard of that. No.
He was a doctor in the concentration camps, and that is what that book is about, and like him trying to find the beauty in these moments that were so horrific. And honestly, like it's perspective. It's insane. Like, highly recommend that book.
What was it called again?
Man's Search for Meaning. It's from Viktor Frankl.
I'm going to take a little note on that real quick.
I'm definitely have to look that up, because there's just something about, all these metaphorical things that just finding in everyday aspects of life, or people's hobbies or people's passions. And, you said something earlier about, finding the light, and it's crazy to think about how the light won't be beautiful if there wasn't darkness. And, burning in your own light, like you were saying, is if you're constantly in the light, you never see dark, then you don't really know how good the light is that you're experiencing. And there's so many different parts of life, and people find this in their passions. And I love reading books that are pretty much exemplifying the fact that there is going to be bad, but that's what makes the good so good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, in a lot of ways too, I'd say I feel more uncomfortable when things are good than when things are bad. Like, when things are bad, it's like, I love that. I love it. It's so, it sucks. And you're like, oh my God, this is terrible. Like, I don't know how I got myself here and all that stuff. But I chased my dream of photography, lost everything in the process of it. Literally was like arguably like my lowest point in life. And it's like, I had to take all that energy and build it back up. And it's like, it's crazy. And that's what I love though now. It's like, that's why I put myself in these crazy situations and positions. It's like, I've known like what the bottom is. Like, I've had 2 dark nights of the soul twice in my life. And it's like, man, nothing will change you more than that. It's like when you face yourself in the mirror and you see, it's like, you literally can't get any lower than this. It's, all you have to do is go up. And I don't know. It's crazy. It's like I said, it's just life changing, man.
Yeah. So do you think that's why you kind of have this affinity for chasing storms and kind of being in the darkness and experiencing that?
For sure. And it's to me, it's crazy. Like, I came from I majored in food science. So like, I had a science background. So like, I understand science pretty well, even without actually having to go study it. So like, I pretty much understood storms since the day I started chasing them. And so I think like it gave me a stronger affinity toward them too. But there's definitely like, I've never taken an art class in my entire life. I've never taken a photography class. Like, obviously, like, I've learned stuff through friends and some stuff on YouTube or whatever over the years. But by and large, like, a lot of this stuff, like, I taught myself how to shoot lightning, and then I didn't know what the hell I was doing the first couple of years, and even now you still mess up. Like, I think that's the beauty of photography. There's times like you take these stupid pictures and you're like, you are so dumb, like, and you want that moment back, but you can't get it with lightning. And so that's what I love. It's like, I have so many blown out photos and photos that'll never see the light of day because it was like, oh my God, like the settings were off or this were off or whatever. But like, it's really hard to shoot in dark. And then like there was a photo I took in 2020 that like ended up chasing this cell after like 8 hours of chasing, didn't have anything, and the grass was all lit up because there were trucks driving in because I was next to a truck stop. And it's like this crazy photo that I got into like 40 different galleries in. And to me, like, I can't explain that other than like I've definitely been blessed with a gift. And also, like, I don't know, I always feel like I have a gift, like a deal with God where I'm like, all right, just don't get me struck by lightning this time, and I'll bring this back to the world and everyone else can enjoy it, like it's kind of this crazy like spiritual experience too. Like I don't know, I think you just kind of, it changes you. Like, you have these crazy moments like we were talking earlier where it's like that one moment where you're like, you could die in a second, but like when you're safe over and over and over and over again, it just changes your perspective on all of it.
Yeah. So while we're talking about storm pictures, there's one picture in particular that I kind of want to ask about. So you had a picture on your Instagram where you captured 2 lightning strikes in the same photo.
Yeah.
Did you
So
know that you captured both of those at the same time, or did you not know until afterwards?
So it depends on which one you're talking about, because I have a couple, but usually, so there was one that is it the different colored ones
I
where
don't
one's like
believe.
purplish, one's is
Yeah,
orange.
yeah, I believe that. And
Okay.
one's on the left that's in focus, and then the one in the distance is on the right.
Yeah. So that one was pretty crazy because that was like I actually had gone to Hugo, so like Hugo's like 2.5 hours outside of Denver. And this is where it's like you have to be a lunatic. So you're talking about driving a couple 100 miles a night, right? And so this is like 8 hours of stuff, and it's pretty crazy. So that picture was the first one. I was driving back, and I had already stopped on the side of the freeway, which is it's pretty wild when you start shooting on the side of the freeway and there's like big rigs like driving past you. It's like insane. And so I was already shooting a little bit, and then when I was going back, there's like you'll kind of start getting rogue lightning away from the cell a little bit. And so that's what I got. But it's nuts because once your eyes adapt, this was the first time I'd ever seen it. It's like a flashbang going off in front of your eyes, but you can actually start zeroing in on like single bolts of lightning. And so that's kind of what I saw was this one area. I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to go over. And I pulled off on the side of the road because I knew kind of in the direction it was going. And my friend started texting me at the same time. She's one of my best friends, and she was like, "Hey, just saw your picture on the news, and it was from the night before that I had sent in." And so I just started laughing and was like, "I'm not worried about last night. I'm worried about right now." And so I like sent her a picture of where I was at, and I just kind of like pointed out toward the field, and I knew there was bolts. I knew the big one was there, but I didn't know the smaller one was off in the distance. And it's kind of crazy because the differences in the colors are from the temperature of the lightning. So like when you're like white lightning, you're looking at like 50,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which is hotter than the temperature of the sun. And then you'll go into purples, and you'll go all the way down to like oranges. So it's almost like the spectrum of the rainbows, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the one off in the distance, because it was smaller, when you start getting more particles and gases further away, it'll start making it more orange, or it can. And so that's kind of why you have those two differences in the colors. But it's pretty cool. Like that's still one of my favorite shots I ever got. But it's not like it's weird when you get into like galleries and stuff. You kind of know what really people are looking for and what sells and all that kind of stuff. So I actually had a shot I had gotten a little bit earlier in the year, as opposed to that one. That one like it won a couple gallery awards and stuff when I entered it, but it's kind of wild because like that one will always be one of my favorites because of those color differences, but
Yeah.
to other people it's usually not. It's like whatever.
Well, I thought it was awesome. So at
Thanks,
what
man.
point did you notice that you were going to start, entering into galleries and stuff like that?
2019. I mean, like so I started in September of 2016 was when I bought my first camera. I started selling like professionally on like Shutterstock and some other stock photography sites by like November of that year. So like I knew kind of early on like my technical acumen was there. And then I think as time went on, like it's like anything, you just kind of start getting bored and you're like, okay, cool, start like checking this out. And so I started like looking into galleries, and then so I think I got in my first one in like September of like 2019, so like 3 years later, right? And then once 2020 hit, I was like really like, okay, this like what else am I going to do other than like enter all these thousands of photos that I had sitting around? So it's kind of wild because your what you start entering becomes different, and the way you're shooting things becomes different, and so you kind of understand the way jurors work better, and it's kind of just like leads and progresses along the way. And I mean, galleries are awesome and they're great, but like if you really want to go down that road, you got to start looking at printing costs, entering costs, right? So like a lot of them you'll have like, well, it's like 50, $60 to enter just that. Then you have to print. And if you're out of state, you have to ship. So it gets super expensive. And then most galleries will take like 30 to 50% off the top too.
Oh,
So,
wow.
you know, even like, yeah, so like a lot of photographers, when they start looking into that, I try to be realistic with them. I'm like, hey, it's great. But your goal shouldn't be just to sell your photo. It should be, you know, I mean, there's even prize money and stuff like that. So there's other things there, notoriety, obviously, but it gets expensive, like printing and shipping and all that is pretty difficult. So like now I look back and I'm like, damn, I don't know how I did it, but like kind of glad I did.
That's crazy.
Do you remember what the first photo was that that won or that was published or anything like that?
God, like my first photo I sold, I think was from it was a trip I did up the Oregon coast. So it was like kind of looking through this forest and you could see the beach, which was crazy. It was like the first time I had ever seen it. It was funny. I actually realized later on I had it on manual focus, so thank God it actually like focused. I had like accidentally hit it or something. But that was like really my first one I sold, and then like my first one's like published. Man, it's so crazy thinking back now. I'm like, oh my God, like I don't even know like everything that's been published or whatever. And like now I'm at the point, I don't know if it's flattering or not, but I have to deal a lot of times. Like I have to Google my name like every single month because like I've had to send like cease and desist letters to people like taking my stuff, and I mean, and it's gnarly. And I'm talking like big publications too. So it's
Wow.
like it's so crazy once you hit a certain level where you're like, yeah, like totally like you totally can't use that. I don't know where like you thought that was going to be okay, but that's where like kind of like I said, like photography's in this weird space of like, you know, it is so awesome and you have so many people you can touch, but also like there's so much like theft you deal with on that side, and really the worst thing that happens is like, yeah, okay, cool, they tell you to screw off or whatever, and then it's like, well, are you gonna really go hire a lawyer at this point? Like there's just so much that goes into it.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that. That's pretty wild.
Yeah,
That's
it's
insane.
fun, let me tell you.
Sounds like it.
So I saw on
Jeez,
your
dude.
Instagram that you have been published in National Geographic. So was that something where you were just published and they bought the rights to your artwork, or did you actually have to apply for that?
No, so I actually had this guy reach out. It's funny. It was like last year after I got back from Florida and everything, and um, which was ironic. He like hit me up for my Florida collection because I have like a ebook I published, and then I have this Florida collection that I left on my website too. And so he had found all my stuff on there, and I was like, hey, you know, I was like, I honestly have like buddies in Florida that are better photographers than me, so like I totally was like nonchalant and I had sent him all that, like all my buddies' names and stuff. And he was like, no, no, I really like your work. I want to use something from you. So can you send me this portfolio? So I sent him like, I don't know, 30 or 40 photos. And he was like, oh, I like this one. And was like, yeah, I'll send it to you and all this stuff. And like, you know, it's like anything, especially when you come from nothing, you don't really believe like it's real and all that stuff. So I was like, oh, dude, this has to be some scam, right? And so he sends me the stuff. He's like, all right, cool. He's like, well, I just need your banking info for routing you the money and blah, blah, because it was in the UK. And I was like, oh, no. I was like, this has to be a scam. So, like, I sent him an email back and was like, hey, man, you know, I was like, don't worry about it. This one's on the house. Like, you know, feel free to publish it, whatever. And I was on the phone with my buddy from Florida later. It's like, you idiot. Like, that literally, he needs that info to actually wire you money, dude. So I was like, I had to email him back and was like, oh, hey man, I was just kidding. I've never done this before. So like, it's like this totally crazy thing of like, I literally did not believe it was real, but then it happened, and I was like, oh my god, it's like so cool. So it was like a really cool and like humbling experience, but it's just weird. You know, you get to a point where like even after that happened, I remember it happening that day, and then like being able to share it. It's cool like sharing it with your community because you feel like they've been a part of it for supporting you for so long and all that. But it's like anything. I'm always like, oh man, that was so cool. What's next? You know, you just like you're so focused on keeping growing and keeping going forward that really it's like I don't know. I guess it's like being tied to the process of what you're doing, right? Like I
Mhm.
love the process of what I do. I love all of it, and like the accolades are fine, and that's great. But like I remember calling one of my best friends before the 200-mile ride I did, and we were on the phone, and he was like, "You all right? You sound kind of sad." I was like, "Dude, honestly," I was like, "It's like this 200-mile ride's over, man. Like, I don't know what I'm gonna do after this." I was like already like so bummed about it, but that's a genuine thing for me. It's like, you spend all this time trying to get your 30 seconds of fame, but you spend hours and days and years on this one thing to get you there. So you really have to love the process and not the outcome, which luckily I do.
Yeah. I never thought about that. See, I'm the type of person where when I'm like exploring outdoors, it's all about the experience, not the result. But when it comes to photography, I always think about the result. Similarly to you, when I take a picture, I already know how I'm going to edit it or how I would like to edit it. But I guess I need to take a step back sometimes and actually think about that, because that spoke to me. I'm always thinking about the product and the final product of what I'm going to have.
Well, I think you gotta, for me at least, like I know, like my final product is for people. It's not for me. Like I mean, I'm like, okay, cool. I've got a hard drive full of shots. It's like whatever. But like, to me, it's like I still am like tied to like I know what it took to get this photo. I know what happened after this, which was like I was sitting on a ridge and my sunscreen actually blew down this ravine, and I was almost to the end of this hike, and then like I was like, nope. I was again like sixth sense. It's like I was like, there's a storm coming in. Look it down. The storm comes in, just complete whiteout, and it's wild. Like so, to me, like my whole day is actually tied to this photo versus like this one photo. But it's what people know me for. It's like, oh my god, it's such a great photo. I'm like, yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
Dude, have you ever considered writing a book with the stories that go along with your photos?
Yeah, so I actually wrote 2 books and published them. So I have one which is called Intimate Isolation. It was my first 5 years of photos. So this is actually the cover of it. And then my second book was Colorado Through the Seasons. It was a 35-piece exhibit that I had go up in Denver International Airport. So that got delayed. The day I printed it, I spent $10,000 to print that exhibit. And the day I printed it, they sent me an email where like, hey, don't know, but the world's shut down, so we're going to have to postpone this thing. And so the gallery actually didn't end up going up until 2022. So it was like I sat, and then that, like, actually, all the photos survived the break-in into my storage unit where I lost like $4,000 worth of stuff, and they stole all my original paintings and like crazy stuff, right? So it's like, so I've got 2 hardcover books, and then I have 4 ebooks. So I put one on storms and then one on my Florida experience too. But the problem is, right, like for me too, like that's even an expensive adventure, because like publishing a book, like I hired basically a designer, editor, well, more designer, but basically that's still like $1,500, and then you have to buy ISBNs. And I mean, I can write a book on writing a book. It's absolutely like a monster, right? But I've had more people actually reach out to me, not just on writing a book, but more writing like kind of my experiences and kind of the more of the stuff I've gone through with things, just because it's a different animal. But I don't know. I'm still weird about sharing my whole story. So I kind of like, we'll see. I do know I want to do more books in the future, but I just need to figure out a way to streamline it, I think, a little bit better.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. Pardon my ignorance. I didn't know that. It's just
no, you're fine.
Like, like that photo behind you, for example. Everybody, and I guess that's the good and bad things about like social media, right? Like they see the thing, but at face value, they don't know all the other things that go along with it. The story, what happened to make it, what you needed to do, and this and that. I feel like that'd be some really interesting content. Yeah, I was just curious.
Yeah. No. I appreciate it, and I think I'm going to do more down the road. Like I said, it's just like, it's kind of like anything though, right? You know what goes into it, and then you're like, oh my God, like the whole process of creating a book was like so much work too. So now I'm like, all right, maybe I need to hire someone to like craft most of that too.
Right. Yeah, we've had a few authors on, and we've had some conversations with them, and it's just so much work. And I'm not a writer. Hell, I'm barely a reader. And I couldn't even imagine the amount of work just getting the words and or pictures together, but then everything in the process after that is just, it's mind boggling to me. I just don't, I don't think I'd ever be able to even do it.
It certainly is a labor of love. That's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And then when you get into the self-published side, the print quality becomes a issue too, like between Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And like I use a printer called lulu.com, and I love them. Their quality is amazing. But it's more of you have to drive people to that website versus if you had Amazon or Barnes & Noble, right? Like that becomes a different sales thing too. So, but yeah, I mean, I got the book in Barnes & Noble. I've done some Barnes & Noble signings and stuff like that too. So it's like, it is a really cool experience. And then people get to visit you and people that have known you your whole life, and so like, it's kind of sweet, but also it's just a lot. It's a lot to take on and like want to really push yourself to that level too.
Right.
Oh, for sure.
That's awesome. Well, we're getting kind of close to having to close her down. So I have one more question for you, if that's all right.
I have one too. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. So we each have one more question for you. So for somebody that is going through mental health stuff and maybe just kind of doesn't know where to go, what is the thing that you would recommend, the first thing that they could do in terms of nature, on how they can see if that's what's going to be able to help them through their hard situation?
I mean, honestly, it's like going out, and you don't have to do crazy things, right? Like, honestly, there's stuff as simple as like sitting next to a body of water or a lake or the beach. My therapist, when I was younger, like he told me, he's like, you know what? It's like, why don't you just go down, sit next to the waves and listen to them crash, and it's going to change something inside of you. And I agree with that. There's stuff as simple as that. Or if you can I think disconnecting is a big thing now too, right? That wasn't an issue when I was younger, but I think that's something now that I really focus on, is like turning my phone. I turn my phone on airplane mode when I'm hiking. Like I don't want people to have access to me, because you're needing to get like reconnected to the world around you. I think I tell everyone this is the way I equate nature is, when you're in the world, if you took a blank piece of paper, it would be like scribbles all across, right? It's like ADD. We have things coming at us from emails and calls and texts and Microsoft Teams and all these things. And, you can't really focus. It's almost like manufactured ADD, right? And then you go into the woods and it's like watching, like you write a novel. It's succinct lines. You can actually process your thoughts. You can reconnect to yourself and to the world around you. So to me, it's like, just go take a walk, or like for me, even on the other side, it's like biking. Like biking is another very therapeutic thing to me. So it's like, you don't necessarily have to go like do anything crazy, but sometimes it's just like, go sit on a picnic bench at the park, you can watch the birds fly by you. You can listen to the sounds, and you're literally reconnecting with the world around you. So I think that just is like a tremendous help for the mental health side of things.
I like it.
Awesome. Good deal. Okay. Try to ask my question. Try to be quick about it. I'm gonna try and be quick about it. Or like way earlier in the episode, we were talking about, or you had made a comment about how something along the lines of, you don't talking about camera gear, like you don't need nothing fancy to go and get into it, whatever. So for the aspiring photographer or someone who maybe would like to, but is kind of put off by the cost of entry, so to speak, what kind of tips would you have for those folks who are wanting or who are curious about photography, don't know where to start, or maybe, or just, I don't know, some general recommendations maybe on like entry level gear or key, I guess, concepts or I guess techniques, like maybe focusing on composition, lighting, stuff like that. What are some general advice you give to someone who's wanting to get in or into or explore photography?
So, I mean, I think like the easiest thing is everyone's got a cell phone these days, right? And honestly, like the cameras on cell phones are pretty damn good. So I think if that's something you really want to explore, a lot of cameras, it's just like point and shoot, which is pretty much what you're starting your starting cameras are going to be anyway, right? Like they have settings that are made for shooting people or shooting landscapes or buildings or whatever. So starting out on your camera is honestly the best thing in the world to do. I mean, that's how I started like a year before I even bought a camera. And learning filters, like if you're trying to get into Instagram and all that stuff, understanding the way filters work, that's a good place to start. And if you want to progress into entry level cameras, like they really aren't that expensive anymore compared to what they used to be. I mean, I remember my first one was a bundle. I spent $600 and I almost had a heart attack because I was like, oh my God, like I've never spent $600 on something like this. And then now I'm like, oh yeah, $3,000. That's a totally good deal on a camera, right? So like, it's kind of escalation, but I think you can buy some very entry level stuff. You can go on Craigslist and buy some refurbished stuff. There's always like, camera stores are trying to unload old stuff too. So I think it's kind of like what you're trying to get into. It's a good way to look at it. If you're looking for like photography resources and stuff, I actually have a place on my website, just jeremyjanusphotography.com, that like you can go there and I actually have entry level recommendations. And then also like I have like nature photography course on Skillshare. So there's places you can go that are actually going to be like really good resources for you. And I'm not the only one, right? Like there's tons of other photographers that do this kind of stuff. But I think just really like educating yourself on that and understanding like if that's the way you want to go, because there actually are like manual modes you can do on a lot of your cell phones too now. Mm-hmm. So I think trying to figure that out and really realizing that. And then also you could go to borrowlenses.com and they have you can rent stuff on there. You can go to the local like camera shop and rent like an entry-level camera from them too. So there's 10 million different ways to do it, or go borrow a friend's camera for the afternoon. I think you just got to figure out if you really like to do it, because the other thing is too, when you get out in nature or whatever you're doing, you have to be used to carrying around another 2 to 3 pounds too. And some people don't like that. And if you're OCD, you're worried about rain or snow or whatever hitting your lens, and then it's making you go crazy because you got to keep readjusting. So I think it's just like kind of trying to start out as easy as you can and figure out if you really want it, because there's nothing worse than spending a couple $1,000s on something and being like, oh my God, I absolutely hate this more than anything on this planet,
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of go off what you've said, are very similar to that. I've heard people say before, the best camera is the camera you have. And everybody has one of these, In fact, 2 of the most sold pictures that I have on any type of stock site, I think Shutterstock it was, the top 2 selling photos I have are both taken with a cell phone, both of which I was with Jose on. So the first one was we went to the Llano and I took some pictures of some limestone flutes. It was actually Jose had slipped and fallen, and I went to go make sure he was okay. And at that same spot, there were some limestone flutes. I took a picture of my cell phone. And then the other one, we were at a gun range, and one of our friends was sighting in his rifle and kept saying left when it meant right, and we were giving him hell for it. And while we were talking about that, making fun of him, I just put my phone down, took a picture of the gun there on the rack, and those are the 2 most sold photos that I have, and they were both taken with a cell phone. So if anybody does want to get started, there's a good place to start there. And there are some apps, even at like iPhone, there aren't really manual settings you can use too much on the iPhone, but there's an app for like $6 called Moment, and you can literally change everything on that app, all manual. And so the best camera is the one you got.
Yeah, completely agree. And also I will say this, don't get caught up in fantasizing about what it is to be like a nature photographer either, right? Like people think it's like, oh my God, I bought this camera and I sell and I take these beautiful photos and I make millions of dollars. It's like, it is not easy to sell nature photography. It's actually one of the hardest things I've ever done in my entire life. And I think that you have to have a realistic side about it too, right? Like you're going to start somewhere, and it doesn't mean you're just going to become insta famous. I mean, especially now, like the likelihood of your photos going viral now is like nil. So you got to just love the process and enjoy just shooting if that's what you want to do.
Absolutely. I don't think we can end the episode on a better note than that. So where can people find you at?
I'm on Instagram and Facebook, just Jeremy Janus Photography. You can go to my website, jeremyjanusphotography.com, and Like I said, I've got a ton of different photography resources for people, a lot of my artwork that I've done over the years. And then, yeah, you can find my books on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and Lulu.com.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure I put all the links in the description for you and send people your way.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you guys. Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
Of course, anytime. You're welcome back anytime. I know that there's probably 500 other stories you got that you could have shared. So, but those of y'all that made it to the end, we appreciate y'all for watching. We'll catch y'all next time.
This has been Wildlife Outdoors. Thanks for listening. Follow us on Facebook at Wildlife Outdoors and on Instagram at wild.life.outdoors. Let's go live life on the wild side.